the Berg Knowles Theory Podcast.
Welcome to the Berg Knowles Theory Podcast, everybody, where we discuss AI and how you can actually use it. Our goal is to ensure that you, our listener, have the tools, knowledge, and understanding to leverage AI to simplify and automate areas of your life or business. I'm Ian Knowles, alongside my main man and AI wizard, Harry Berg. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing something you hear a lot about, which is prompts and prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is a skill that involves persuading a model to do what you want by entering text into the chat box that is then processed by the model or the LLM or large language model to then ultimately give you a response. So we're going to explore what that means, why it's important. There's conversation around prompt engineering as a skill, a highly leveraged skill that will eventually be a highly paid skill. There's conversation about prompt engineers replacing computer scientists and engineers, which I think Harry and I both agree is probably not going to happen. But important to know what prompts are, important to know what prompt engineering is, and important to know how to engineer prompts so that you can effectively use large language models, SLMs, small language models, as well as AI tools in general. So let's dive into it, Harry. Let's say, what are prompts? Why are they important? How do we use them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've covered it pretty well, but a prompt is just a text that you give to an AI system that can understand text. So most of the AI systems that we're all used to using these days are these large language models. Language models are models that can understand that text. So it's a certain type of AI model that you can actually give this prompt, which is just a sentence or a few sentences or maybe a huge block of text, which inform that AI system of what you want it to do. So that's really what prompt is as a starting point.
So, there's a lot of folks that are speculating, prompt engineering as a trade, and that obviously implies that there's a certain skill to it, right? Mm-hmm. The World Economic Forum, like them or not, they've stated that prompt engineering will be the job of the future. So it's pretty simple, but it's also very sophisticated and complex, because I think the way that most people interact with, ChatGPT or any of the large language models that are commercially available right now, it tends to be very simple, right? In terms of what they're asking of these models, like write me a marketing plan. And then they don't get what they want. And they say, this isn't that great. I could type write me a marketing plan into Google and get, 20 documents or 20 articles that can help me write a marketing plan. The bulleted list of how to do it is helpful, but it's really not customized to my situation, my business. But that's because the prompt itself wasn't unique enough or sophisticated enough to prompt what you want from the language model to give you what you need with the relevant context. So let's talk about the importance of of specificity in prompt engineering, as well as context and data in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, we're all used to writing search queries into Google, and I think a lot of people bring that same skill set and apply it directly to language models. They give ChatGPT a drastically underspecified prompt, which would work for getting you the right content from Google, but they don't get you what you want from these large language models, and they certainly don't tap into what these large language models are capable of. So there is some skill to it, certainly, of can you actually articulate well enough what you really want these large language models to do. And so, there are many different tricks that people use, and we can talk about those. But I'd say, the three things in a checklist for writing a good prompt for a large language model are: describe the persona, the personality of how you want the large language model to behave, provide all the background context which it needs to actually answer this request and do what you want, and thirdly, specify the task as clearly as you can. So, to dive into each of those in a little bit more detail, when describing the personality, you can use tricks as in, act as a marketing expert, act as a lawyer, act as a specific individual. You are this person. You can tell them to take on that personality. And actually describing a particular individual, like, act as Steve Jobs, that can be a really good trick, because Steve Jobs as a phrase encapsulates a lot of information which that large language model can bring to bear without you having to write paragraphs and paragraphs about the personality of Steve Jobs and what you want it to include and not. In that personality, you can also describe character traits. Do you want it to be professional or fun and friendly, and really anything around how this model is going to speak. So you can put all of that stuff there. In the background context, you want to include things about, obviously, what is the system talking about? What does your business do? What is your product suite? Whatever it is you want there. Maybe you include descriptions about who the user is. You could pull those in from your system which you're building, or you could get them from anywhere else, or you could even ask the user to provide them. And you could also include things like, where is the user using this language model? Are they on a phone call with it? Are they looking at it on a small phone screen, so it should provide smaller responses? Are they looking at it on desktop or whatever? The voice interaction modality there is interesting because obviously, you don't want it to provide like structured information with brackets and all of this kind of thing. Like bullet pointed lists aren't going to be communicated in a voice response. So that kind of thing can be useful to put in the background context there. And the third thing I mentioned, which is probably the most important, is describing the task at hand as clearly as you can and describing what the model should do specifically. So things that you can include there are things such as, the length of the response, the format of the response. Do you want it in JSON, this particular kind of code structured output? Do you want it in bullet points? Do you want to include emojis or whatever it is? But of course, just describing in clear detail what the model should do, how it should do it, what the steps are to achieve the task at hand. So those three things, personality, background, context, and the task, are the basis of writing a good prompt. If you don't include those, of course, it's not going to do what you expect it to do.
Right. And in the context of, I'll take research, for example, let's say somebody was researching climate change. They might type into the model, tell me about climate change, right? Which is very, very general, right? If you ask a human being to tell you about climate change, it's almost like, where do you start, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with a model. If you were to say something more along the lines of, provide a balanced overview of the scientific consensus on climate change, you'll yield a more nuanced response with probably more information, with more clarity, with more purpose than if you just have a general question. And in the same, I think, on the other side of that same coin, with respect to, let's say business objectives, I'll go back to my example as, which I mentioned before, writing a marketing plan. If you were to ask a human being to, write me a marketing plan, but they have no context, they have no detail, they have no data, what are they going to do, right? How are they ultimately going to provide you with what you're looking for if they know nothing else about the context of the situation? And that same principle applies with models. And so to your point earlier, specificity and clarity is critical. Being super clear and objective, while also providing enough data, supporting data, to so that the model itself has what it needs to not only be informed on the task at hand, but also the contextual information that it needs to provide you with an accurate response, or at least a mostly accurate response, right? Something that can actually be useful for you as the user. But even beyond that, there's iteration and refinement that's important to discuss as well, because it is an iterative process. You're unlikely that you're going to get exactly what you're looking for on the first query.
Yeah, absolutely right. So just to your first point, a lot of people are disillusioned by AI systems because they provide overly simplistic prompts, which don't capture what you really want the model to do. And if you say, generate me a marketing plan, there's a million ways to do that. Mathematically speaking, there's a lot of variance in the model output. And so providing all that extra context really puts the model at a laser focus and reduces how different the outputs are going to be based on what you want, or based on maybe you're using the same prompt repeatedly. If you can provide that extra accuracy, you can get past this disillusionment where people assume that the AI model can infer very complex things about how you want it to behave. And to your second point about prompt engineering being an iterative process, absolutely. You're not going to get it right on the first try. And much like software engineering is a continuous process that you're never going to catch all the bugs first time, you're going to need to continue to work on that system to develop it and remove those issues. So is prompt engineering. You might write a good prompt the first time, it works for the first 10 times you use it, and then does something really dumb, which you didn't expect on that 11th time. And that's probably because you're using it in an edge case here and you missed out that detail. And so what you would do in that case is go back to the original prompt and update it. One thing that I think is useful for the everyday person is to develop a prompt kit. This is kind of, you can put it wherever you want, put it in your Apple Notes, a list of the prompts which you want to reuse and reuse. And if you have those stored somewhere, you can easily go back, refine them, add to them, and then pull them in whenever you need them. So you might be working on ChatGPT, you've got that notes open next to it, you can pull in the prompts whenever you need. Or if you're a little bit more advanced and you have an OpenAI Plus subscription, you can create a custom GPT and you can put these prompts in the instructions input field when you're configuring that GPT. So these aren't just the descriptions of what you put in the messages, but they're effectively how you program, or maybe you'd say promptgram, these AI systems, these custom GPTs, because you can put these good prompts, which might be pages long, in the background so that they're used by the AI model anytime you start a new chat, not just in the message. And if you're building a custom GPT like that, you wouldn't need to keep pulling things out of your prompt kit.
I think you just created a new word there, promptgram. I think you need to own that one. Did somebody else come up?
Yeah.
That's the first I've heard it. I think that's a Harry Berg original.
It may well be. I don't know. If I'm taking that from anybody, please, I give credit. So there you go.
So there's layers to prompting, right? So you just referenced, you can actually build prompts into kind of the fundamental nature of the GPT that you are interacting with or that you've created. But then there's the way that I would think about this is you sort of have primary prompts and secondary prompts, and I'll categorize secondary prompts as the prompts that you build into the model itself, and primary prompts being the one that you type in, as you're interfacing with it on a specific task. So that's important to consider. How when we think about the complexity and sophistication and size of prompts, I don't know that most people think about it more than a simple query like they would input to Google, right? It's like a sentence or two.
Maybe not.
But if you look at how people who are very advanced in using language models are using prompts, these prompts are fairly sophisticated in size. So how important is it? Is more detail better in a prompt, or is there a sweet spot of detail, or could you effectively put a prompt in there that's a page long?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could absolutely put a page-long prompt. One of the limitations of language models still to this day is the size of the prompt, the max size, or what you'd call the context window size, technically. Short prompts can work well. Long prompts can be better. Really depends on your task. One thing we can talk into a little bit more is prompting for image generators, in which case, you can get like really stunning results, even from just giving a few emojis as a prompt. But mostly for text-based tasks, generally your AI system is going to perform better if you give it all the information. And so, longer prompt is better in general. However, what you want to avoid is filling the prompt with a lot of fluff. You want to make sure that everything in there is useful information, because when these large language models process these input words, which turns into these things called tokens, it has to basically do a calculation where it figures out what's the context of one relative to all the others. So if you've got 1,000 tokens, it has to do this 1,000 by 1,000 calculation to produce an output. So it can make them take a little bit longer. Well, that's a very active area of research, making that specific calculation faster. But more importantly, it can just the model can get distracted by the unimportant stuff in the prompt. So if there is a more succinct way to describe something, that can be good. Like I said earlier, a really good example is providing the name of a person who exhibits the character traits you want the model to show. Because that name, just 2 words, first and last name, that can capture a lot of the detail that it might otherwise take you paragraphs to explain. And then, there's a long checklist of items beyond the 3 things: personality, background, context, and the specific task details. There's a long checklist of things which you can add in to make your prompts better. One example I'll give here, which is a big game changer for the quality of your prompt, is providing examples. And so you might have an AI system that you want to help you draft your rough notes into LinkedIn posts. Now, if you do that off the shelf, the output is going to be something that we can all tell clearly written by ChatGPT. But if you provide an example, which might be a page long, give that in the prompt and say, here is an example of the kind of thing I'd like you to provide, maybe you have 3 or 4 of those, then it can really help home in the types of responses, the types of wording that these AI systems generate. So providing examples is an excellent approach to writing better prompts. There are so many more details as well. Like, people are probably going to be watching this and saying, Harry doesn't know about this, that, this trick. The thing is, they're all like, there's new tricks coming out every day. And for different problems, different things are going to work better. So I don't really want to give any specific, there's no hacks to it. People get all these bullshit cheat sheets of, here's the 100 things you need to include in your prompt. Like, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is it does your task well. And what I would advise best is stick with that 3-part simple checklist and then go iteratively from there. And when I say iteratively, I literally mean the model does something wrong. You write a sentence which says, don't do that, or here's a bad example, here's good versus bad example, there's another way to do it, and you add that back into the prompt. So I prefer to do it iteratively, and a lot of my prompts are something along those lines. There's the chunk of text I wrote initially, followed by bullet points of sentences of like, don't do this, always do this, don't provide exclamation marks, these kind of things, don't use emojis, whatever it is. Maybe 2 techniques that I will mention are chain of thought prompting, which is a technique where you say something along the lines of think this through step by step and provide your reasoning. And so that helps the model to make sure that the response has a good step-by-step explanation behind it. And, it can capture maybe the 10-step process which you've given in the prompt as well. There's another more technical thing, which is called tree of thought prompting, which is where you would have to kind of engineer this behind the scenes. It's not going to happen automatically, but where you'd have the model do something like generate 3 responses for the first step, and then generate 3 responses for each of those, and then basically remove any which are inconsistent with the instructions by referring back to this chain of thought in a step-by-step process you've given it. So those are a few techniques, but overall, there's no hacks to it. Best thing to do is to do it iteratively.
Yeah, and the chain of thought comment's an interesting one, because I think that's where everybody wants to see this go. We want, you and I believe that we eventually and inevitably will be interacting with AI much like we interact with humans. Right now, it's not quite there. It's very much you're interacting with a computer in many ways, and so there's a lot of this finessing that has to happen to get it right. But it seems like the capability is even now the capability to interact with AI now is like getting better almost by the day. Maybe that's because we're getting smarter about it, but the technology just seems to be advancing so rapidly. And inference, inference is a big part of this equation too, because it's not, there's a lot of nuance and ambiguity to the human language, right? And so we'll type as we think, and we think that it's clear, but the words as they're read by the system might not know exactly what our intention is. And so it sort of has to make sense of what we're saying, by understanding the contextual wording, the contextual data, to then provide a response to us that's relevant. So I want to spend a second on that, on just inference in these models, and how important it is to be super, super specific, while also being, while also not putting together an awkward sentence that's sort of over-engineered that might take the model down a path that's not what you intended.
Yeah. So one thing just to clarify is that we use the word inference a lot in machine learning to talk about any kind of AI model doing predictions. But what we're talking about here is, right, can the model infer what you want and what you want it to do based on a simple prompt? Effectively, you want these models to be able to reason, and that's still one of the big open challenges with developing large language models. Can we make them intelligent enough to reason well enough that they're very good at figuring out what we really wanted it to do, as opposed to, just acting too literally? And one incredible thing for us these days using products like ChatGPT, or even building our own applications, is that as companies developing the foundation models like OpenAI release a new model, all of the benefits of that new model, for example, when GPT-4 came out or GPT-5 is coming out, all the benefits of that new model are immediately baked into the product. And so behind the scenes, thousands of people working on developing these models, every single improvement they make benefits all of us. And as a developer, It's a one-line change to upgrade your model from GPT-4 to GPT-5 so that all of your downstream customers using your AI product, they also get that benefit as well. And so that inference is going to become more and more powerful as new models are released automatically.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I'll say that again. At the end of the day, really all that matters is how useful it is to the user, right? The vast majority of people, the 99.99999% of people are not going to go this deep on understanding all the ins and outs of AI, right? When you buy a fancy car that goes fast, most people don't really care about how all the bits and pieces of the engine work. They just want it to be comfortable and fast, right? So, and look nice. And same thing.
People listening to this probably know us well enough that we're very much on that practical level, right? Like we don't care too much about the details, and I explain some complicated stuff sometimes, but the details don't really matter. They're just for intellectual curiosity. What's much more interesting is the application. So just how good are these systems at the end of the day?
Right. How useful is it? And it is easy to, if you're hearing all of this and you haven't gone, if you haven't interacted with AI, or maybe you have and you're disillusioned because it just seems so complex. We are still in the early innings, but you're already, if you're already taking a step forward to use these technologies and learn them, you're already, way ahead of most people. But what's most important for this industry is to ensure that it's incredibly useful so that we're not adding more steps to people's process, right? At the end of the day, what everyone in AI touts is that this is going to speed up, our world. It's going to reduce redundant jobs, a lot of manual data entry. It's going to enhance our ability to perform and deliver as employees. It's going to, reduce costs. It's all this good stuff. I mean, I'll put the scary stuff aside because that's not what we're talking about here. But if you can't get past step 1 or 2 because you just don't understand it, then adoption is going to take a hit, and that's going to be challenging for people. I mean, at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of folks who are willing to put up with what's going on with AI right now to learn it and get good at it because they see that this is going to be, this is the way of the future, and it's all evolving over time, but they want to get smart on it now, and they're likely going to take a big step forward.
I think this is a really good segue to talk about prompt engineering as a job. Here's my take. Yeah. Prompt engineering is not a job. It's a skill set, which everybody should have on their CV. At whatever level of the technical spectrum you sit, you're probably going to have an interface which has this prompt box somewhere. And if you don't know how to write good prompts, at least doing those 3 basic things, personality, background, context, and the task at hand, if you don't have that basic prompt engineering skill set, then you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I really think it's not a job. It's a part of everybody's job, especially for software engineers, as AI eats up more and more of the software engineering stack, and you're not writing so much of the code anymore. Instead, you just write the line which says, language model, do this complicated thing for me. You need to be able to know how to write the prompt in that line of code, which achieves the task that you want consistently. So I think everybody should be doing it. It should be on all of your CV, and we're here to expand on it if you don't know how to put that in your CV.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's why it's important to learn this stuff. I believe it was Mark Cuban that said, AI is not going to take your job. It's people that use AI that are going to take your job. And I believe that to be true. I
agree.
I mean, we obviously play around with a lot of different tools, in this space and building stuff on our side. And when you get it working, it's really incredible. And even just using it on a day-to-day basis, it could be helpful. I mean, I was doing research yesterday and it cut down, if I think about the process for how I would research prior to ChatGPT, and I think about how much work I got done in an hour yesterday, I got, 2 or 3 days of research done in an hour, right?
Yeah.
And
astonishing. Yeah.
And now I have a ton of stuff to read through over the weekend that otherwise would have been me like creating a Google Drive with links to articles that I have to click around and have 1,000 browser tabs open, and then be printing them out. I was able to summarize all those articles, put them in a file, and now over the weekend I can read them on my iPad and just right. Yeah. Like that's tremendous. I genuinely, I'll tell you, I probably 10 hours worth of research consolidated to an hour.
Yeah,
right?
it's wicked, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
And again, maybe just to cap off, like I think wherever you sit on the technical spectrum, prompt engineering is going to be an important skill for you if you're a developer, if you're a manager, or even right at the other end, if you're an artist. And I think what we want to talk about in the next pod is specifically prompt engineering for image generation, where we can do more examples of this stuff. But that's probably more and more of the future of the creative industry as well, aside from the technical industry, because you have these tools like DALL-E, which can generate, profoundly intricate images of whatever you want if you can prompt them correctly. And in that episode, we'll talk about some really interesting things where, there are some particular words that capture a lot of meaning. Much like I said, a person's
Mhm.
name captures a lot of meaning about their personality. For images, it's really astonishing, the difference that one word can make. Whereas for text prompts, it's less of an issue, and you should probably
It's
just do
like
it iteratively.
it's like it's like Scrabble. You ever played Scrabble? Some words are
Yeah,
worth a lot, some words are worth a little. It's like a huge game of Scrabble.
I
Well,
like
it's
it.
because they're
Yeah.
like, if you think about Scrabble, you've got, points, and here you've got tokens and data, right? And the more data is associated with a very specific word or set of words, the more information the model will be able to effectively contextualize relative to your question or to your query.
Yeah.
To your point,
Yeah,
Steve
absolutely. Yeah,
Jobs,
there are useful words and there are less useful words. It's fluff
right?
that you can fill your prompts with, or there's a skill to being able to articulate what you really want. And I think that probably is one of the fundamental skills of prompt engineering, is just given that you know what you want the output to look like, that's great. But can you articulate it? If you
Mm-hmm.
want an AI system to, as an example, behave exactly as you do, you know that better than anybody. But
Mm-hmm.
can you articulate it? Can you
Yeah,
actually describe what that means? So that's the challenge. And a lot of it
yeah,
comes with practice.
yeah. It is challenging. It is, especially with sophisticated questions or problems that are multi-layered and kind of sit on a spectrum. It's difficult to take a thought, even if you know what the endpoint is that you want. It's sometimes difficult to put into words the question that will
Mhm.
allow you or help you to arrive at that destination. I went.
Yeah.
I had a challenge a couple of weeks ago. I was working on a model, and uh, there was when I was spending way more time in Excel, I could do this no problem. But those days are kind of behind me. And so there was a task that I needed to get done with Excel that was very, very complicated, but also very, very simple. And, you know, anybody that's an Excel wizard, if I explained it to them, kind of human to human, they probably would be like, oh, yeah, here's the solution. And this is what you need to do. And this is how you need to, this is how you need to write the formula. Um, so I was like, you know what, let me try this out with ChatGPT. And coming up with the sequence of words, i.e., the question that I needed to ask ChatGPT to give me the code that I would effectively be able to use as the formula for the model, was really, really difficult. It was a real learning experience for me, because if I believe that, I mean, it was getting pretty close to what I needed, that I could copy and paste a formula and then change the numbers and whatnot for exactly what I needed it to do. It didn't ultimately deliver. I had to call a friend, and they were like, "Oh yeah, here's what you need to do." Um, but I believe at some point, going back to these models being able to infer our intention based on the question being asked, this was fairly sophisticated, because there's it's a big financial model. There's a lot of cells that it needs to pull from to get to the specific type of response, and it needs to do that consistently, no matter what the inputs are. But I would like to imagine that one day I'll be better at prompting, and the model itself will be better at inferring, and then we'll be able to live happily ever after.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, I mean, prompts are critical. You've got to learn them and spend time with them if you're going to interact with AI and large language models. Um, Anything else you want to add, Harry, before we wrap the episode up?
I'd maybe mention the point of, one edge that you can have over your competition, whether that is a different company or someone else who's competing for your job, is this ability to articulate things that are specific to your domain. So, you might be someone who knows the language that's very esoteric and specific to your domain. If you can even just give dictionary definitions of the kind of words that you need to be able to use with a language model like ChatGPT, which might not be used to those words because they don't come up very often in the training data which it appears on, then that's a strength that you can bring to the table. And similarly, not just for particular jargon, but for processes, step-by-step approaches to doing something, you can put that sort of thing in your prompt as well and turn these AI systems into effectively a domain expert leveraging your expertise. And just by including these kind of things in the prompt, you can effectively tune these systems to be domain-specific models. Not like you need to train a model from scratch, not like you need to fine-tune a model, but if you provide everything the model should know in the prompt, then it can behave in that way because it can pull on that information every time it generates.
That's a great point. That made me think of something else. The responses from language models are not entirely accurate all the time, right? So let's say you are world-class prompt engineer. You spent days and nights and weekends learning how to engineer these prompts to effectively give you what you're looking for so that you've got a more or less seamless relationship with, choose ChatGPT, our favorite model. But even still, sometimes the responses are not accurate, whether it's data accuracy, whether it's, contextual accuracy. You have to kind of take the responses with a grain of salt. And, of course, there are some times where there's like objective responses, like what color is an apple? It's red. Okay, cool. I don't need to cross-check that with anything. But there are times, especially as you get into more nuanced and complex queries, that require you to, verify and cross-check the response so that you're not either providing inaccurate information to somebody else, or you're not, then running a process that you've been given by ChatGPT that ultimately fails you. So I want to speak to that. I want you to speak to that for a second in terms of the accuracy of these models. Even if you get your prompt perfect and the response looks good, it's important, the models do hallucinate. They can say the wrong things. They can, provide you with inaccurate information. So even still, just, I'd say, fair to say, if it's data, or if it's, probably process, depending on what it is. But I guess the point there is just, don't believe everything that you read. Don't trust it 100%. Yeah. And I guess my question for you, Harry, following that is, what's the best way to mitigate risk from inaccuracies coming from, a model like ChatGPT?
I would say a starting point would be to specify in your prompt, if you do not know something, admit that. If you can include a sentence or something along those lines in your prompt, then you'll encourage or you'll discourage the model from hallucinating. Term you mentioned, hallucinate, where a model responds in a very confident sounding way with complete bullshit information. So that would be a starting point. Just tell the model to admit when it doesn't know something, or when it's wrong, or when it's unsure. As another approach would be to use that chain of thought prompting, which I mentioned, or just saying a sentence along the line of, explain your response.
Mm-hmm.
Or provide references, these kind of things. These models can do that too when they access the internet, or when they access parts of your prompt or parts of your knowledge base. You can say, tell me where you got that from. Include the quote.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen this new technology, or this new, it's sort of a search engine, but the founder of it calls it something else. I think it's a information engine. Perplexity. Yeah. Have you looked at that? Because they're big on citation.
Yeah, I've looked at it. I haven't found it particularly useful for myself. I think it might be more useful for people who are doing scientific research or that sort of thing. I don't face that too many problems where I need to make sure I've cited things specifically. But yeah, it's basically an AI native search engine as I understand it.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that these some of these new platforms are coming out in search and otherwise that have really turned the existing business models upside down. Whether or not they're going to be successful, the jury is still out on a lot of this stuff because it's so new.
Yeah.
But I think 5 years ago it would have been hard to imagine that anyone could ever unseat Google, and not that Google will ever be unseated because they're so deeply entwined in all of our lives for so many reasons. But at least on the search side, which was really what got Google started, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, ChatGPT and these models are one thing. You've got the perplexities of the world. You've got u.com or u.ai. Not sure what there's anyhow. You got a few of these technologies that like legitimately could unseat some of the big players in this space, and it's all because of this technology. It's wild.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I don't think anybody's going to unseat Google personally, at least not in the search space. But I think if Perplexity would find a niche like scientific research or something like that, I think there's a possibility that they could own it.
Yeah, right. I mean, Google is just so relevant to everybody. I don't know.
Yeah, it ain't just search.
All due respect to Bing and Yahoo, but I don't know anybody who's like just Bing it. And that was their whole thing. Like let's turn because Google is a verb, right? Well, Google has become a verb. It's not technically a verb, but Microsoft, all the smart folks over there, let's create a word that could be a verb so that we land in that world of Google, because Google is a noun and a verb. Didn't really work. Do you know anyone that uses Bing?
No.
Me either. Like, I've never heard. No.
They're trying to get sponsored by Microsoft though, yeah.
Oh, well, you know what? This is the challenge to Microsoft. They need to step up their game. Okay, respect.
Step it up, yeah.
But you guys need to step it up. And yeah. All right, we agree on that. But that's honest feedback for them. Nobody's using Bing, Microsoft. Come on, step it up. All right, guys, that's a good episode. We'll wrap it up there. We appreciate you as always, and I will wrap us with a quote as we do, and this one is by the late, great Winston Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. That's it, everybody. Thanks, y'all.
The Berg Knowles Theory Podcast.